Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is frost. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we can use this verb. The first way you might hear the verb frost used is to mean to cover something with small ice crystals. Another way to think about this definition is to think about something freezing. A second way you might hear the verb frost used is to mean to decorate a dessert with icing. If you watched yesterday's video where our verb of the day was ice, we talked about this. So sometimes the words ice and frost, when it comes to decorating a dessert, are used interchangeably. And they can essentially have about the same meaning. A third way you might hear the verb frost used is to mean to tint hair strands to change the color of isolated strands. So what this is meaning is not that someone is dyeing all of their hair, but just small segments will have a slightly different color. You should know that frost is a regular verb. To make the progressive tense, we're going to add ing to form frosty. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by adding ed. Our base verb, frost, ends with this T sound, so our ed is going to make an id sound. Frosted, frosted. I have two phrasal verbs for us to look at today. It's frost over and frost up, and they really have the same meaning, which is to become covered completely with frost, or again, those kind of frozen bits of ice. An example sentence for our first phrasal verb would be, the car's windshield frosted over last night, or the windows frosted up as the temperatures dropped. Those we could switch those meanings, and they again, or switch the phrasal verbs we're using in each of those sentences. They would have the same meaning. Now let's take a look at a couple example sentences using our verb frost. Today we'll practice the simple past, simple present, and the present progressive. Let's start with the simple past tense. In the affirmative, we are going to use that ed form of the verb. This is true no matter what our subject is. And we're using the simple past tense to talk about an action that was completed at a definite time, before the time we are speaking or before the time we are writing. So here is an example sentence. It frosted last night. Notice my subject here, it. Again, all this week you've probably noticed we've had a lot of verbs connected to weather, especially cold weather. And so this it is referring to the weather. If I want to make a negative sentence in the simple past tense, I'm going to use did not and then the base verb. I don't use the ed form in the negative simple past tense. Here's an example sentence. My eyelashes didn't frost up despite the cold temperatures. I don't know if this has happened to you, but it's definitely happened to me where I've been outside and little bits of ice start to form on my eyelashes. And you could say their eyelashes are frosting up. If I want to make a yes or no question in the simple past tense, we're going to start with did, then we'll have our subject, and then the base verb. So again, no ed when we're asking a question. An example, did it frost in October? Now let's take a look at the simple present. We use this verb tense to talk about habits, routines, and facts. And the one thing to keep in mind here is when our subject in the simple present is I, you, we, or they, then we just use the base verb. But if our subject is he, she, or it, then we need to add an S to the end of the verb. Here is an example sentence. She frosts her hair every 2 months. So again, that's connecting back to the third definition of this verb where somebody is changing their hair color. If I want to make a negative sentence in the simple present, I'm going to use do not and then the base verb. That will be with the subjects I, you, we, and they. Or I will use does not in the base verb with the subjects he, she, and it. Here's another example. It doesn't frost in August here. Finally, if I want to ask a yes or no question in the simple present, I would start with do or does, depending on my subject, which comes next, and then I will use the base verb. Here's an example. Do you frost brownies? Brownies are a type of dessert. So again, this is connecting to that second meaning of putting a sugary topping on this particular dessert. Now let's take a look at the present progressive. We use this verb tense to talk about something that is happening right now or an action that is in progress. To make the present progressive, we need two parts. We need the present form of be, which is am, is, or are, depending on our subject, and then the ing form of the verb. Let's look at an affirmative example. It's frosting up the windows. So here we might not know exactly what's causing it. It probably is the weather that is causing this action to happen right now. If we want to make a negative present progressive sentence, then we need to insert not after our be verb. Here's another example. We aren't frosting this cake. So that action is not in progress. Finally, if I want to ask a yes or no question in the present progressive, I'm going to start with a form of be, then I'll have my subject, and then the ing form of the verb. Are they frosting cupcakes now? So I've got a few different examples there of different desserts that could have frosting or icing on them. And now we'll take a look at some words that are related to our verb frost. And the first word we're going to look at is just the noun form of this word. Same spelling, same pronunciation. Here is the meaning of the noun. It's small white ice crystals that form on the ground or other surfaces when the temperature falls below the freezing point. The freezing point, again, is 32 degrees Fahrenheit. So if it goes under that, then water will freeze, or 0 degrees Celsius. Here's an example of the noun frost in a sentence. The plants are covered with frost. Now we'll look at the noun frosty. And I told you that this is really going to have the same definition as icing. It's a mixture of sugar with liquid or butter that is used as coating for desserts. And again, some people might ask, why do we have these two words if they mean the same thing? I think if you are sort of a professional baker, you might use frosting when it kind of creates a higher sort of more puffed up sort of look on a dessert. And when it's very flat and thin, then many people will use icing. But I can tell you from experience, I have heard people use them interchangeably. And that's okay. Here is an example of frosting in a sentence. They're putting chocolate frosting on the cake. The last two words we're going to look at are adjectives. The first is frosty. This can have a couple different meanings. It could mean very cold with frost forming on a surface. An example of that would be yesterday was a cold and frosty day. So we're describing that it was very cold and maybe these ice crystals were forming on surfaces. But frosty could also be used to describe someone or some action that is cold or unfriendly in the way. So an example of that usage would be, he gave me a frosty look. So a cold look, not a warm smile. The last adjective we'll look at today is frosted. It means covered with frost or frosting. So in the first example sentence, she looked at her frosted garden. There, I'm probably describing that ice crystals have formed on some of her plants. Okay? But in the second sentence, they ate frosted cookies, right? This would mean the cookies were covered in frosting. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.